So, welcome to a late start for Saturday Sessions episode 7 tonight. We're missing Eric, who'd normally be with us, but has a big hurricane, and the sound outside is drowning out any chance of his microphone surviving. We are live. On the call, we've got myself, Mark Richards, we've got Rebecca Davis, Wolfgang Brandhuber, and Saahil Panikar. We've got a few topics to kick the session off. But I figured we might start with a quick round robin. Highlights of the week. What was the one or two things that stood about the week that was for you guys?
I can go first. I think for me, the number one highlight of the week was yesterday. I delivered a custom 1 day overview of portfolios and lean portfolio management to a client based in the UK. So for me, it was a little bit of a struggle because I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning and start teaching at 5 a.m. Um, but we had some really, really fun conversations, and this is an organization that, is not super deep into the safe world. They were really just kind of looking for portfolio constructs and um, definitions. So having that conversation without, trying to get super deep into the entire safe framework was just a really fun and unique experience for me. So that was definitely my highlight. And then I would say before that, starting to think about things like, uh, I don't know if we've ever even talked about this on stream before, but one of the side projects that I have been working on in the recent past is starting to apply some more concepts to agile in highly constrained and compliance driven environments. And so I'm starting to crystallize on what I think are some unique principles of agility in that environment that are different from the ones we use elsewhere. I'm not ready to talk about that yet, but I think soon we will be to get some feedback. But I feel like I had a mental breakthrough and I'm pretty excited about it.
Cool. Who else? Highlights of the week.
Go. Um, I really liked this week because there's this quote by Adam Grant that says like we need to treat uninterrupted blocks of time like treasures to guard, and that's kind of summed my week. Of I've been really struggling to get some particular like writing accomplished that takes a lot of deep thought and a lot of research, and um, just really focusing this week on I'm gonna not do anything else. Like that's going to be my primary goal. Was so effective. And I know we all mentally like know that, but actually doing it is really hard sometimes. So it was nice just to get concentrated time, get through something that's been stressing me out, get it done. And then another highlight was just starting to really focus on intentional creativity. Or so I've had like concentration moments in my past where I make sure I like paint once a week or something like that, but really thinking about like the wholeness of creativity and taking intentional time to journal as well as paint and as well as like create physical things as well because I do welding and stuff like that too.
Welding.
Those
Is
were my
this
two.
is this your race car?
Yeah, also just whatever if just a useful skill if something breaks. So
Absolutely.
Wolfgang, what was yours?
My highlight of the week. So, first of all, I worked on a workshop on collaboration maps that I have to give next week. And so actually, when I sat down and started to think about what I'm doing when I'm setting up a transformation and like what I'm actually doing, creating collaboration maps, it was a lot more material than I thought in the first place. So for me, it's so natural because I'm now doing that for years. But teaching that in a workshop to others, saying this is how I'm doing collaboration maps and this is how it looks like and this is how you get there, so that you know who works with whom on what and who is actually putting work into the system or who is getting work or information from you and things like that. This is quite a lot of slides now. But I have 4 hours for the workshop next week, so I think
We
it will
always,
work out.
when you say quite a lot of slides, Wolfgang, we always worry because quite a lot of slides for you, like just a few slides for you would be quite a lot of slides for most of us. Are you in the
Yeah.
hundreds?
So last week I managed to do a 175 slide presentation in 45 minutes. So this was my record.
What is it? That's like 3 slides a minute. How is that even possible? 4
So
slides a minute? Yeah, close.
yeah, it sometimes I'm really faster when I have visualized more. Like I'm speaking about that, but it's a slideshow running in the background saying, "Oh, this is how I visualize that." So I don't know whether this is just a feeling of mine, but sometimes I have the feeling that I get faster by having more slides because the people have more like visuals that they can look at while I'm speaking. I don't know. Probably I always have too many slides, but I like it.
So long as they read really fast.
Yeah. So, the reading is for afterwards, I think. But so the other things that the highlights of the week, I made progress with my Chopin piano piece that I'm working on. I don't know whether I will ever play that to any audience or on any stage, but at least I'm making progress, and I really love that. It's a nocturne by Chopin, and so I was stuck the week before. Now I got unstuck, so I really enjoy having time sitting at the piano. And what else? So I had a third highlight. Now I forgot about it. There was something that I had in mind. It will come back.
All right.
I hand over to you, Mark.
So my highlight for the week was actually probably a double dip. I think I mentioned last week I've been running this facilitation series with a group of Scrum Masters, where every week we do an hour workshop on some aspect of facilitation skills, and then they play with that, and then the next week we add some new facilitation skills. But what we do is we use them to explore the things they've learned when they apply the facilitation skills from the last workshop. So it's been really fun. I'm experimenting with it as a format for building a cohort-based facilitation course next year, because it's such a superpower. And we've been mostly focused on observation. And so we did the first few workshops in person because you can teach people so much more easily about different things that you need to be able to see when you're in person, because so much of it's nonverbal.
Really?
And so we had 3 workshops in, all face-to-face, and then we went, right, let's go virtual. So Thursday was intro to virtual facilitation. And what I wanted to do was say, well, how can you do the same kind of observation virtually as we've been doing physically? Because it's not about looking at people's face on Teams. In all honesty, you've got no clue what's going on when you look at people's face on Teams, because they could be reading their email. In fact, quite often are. So for me, a lot of that is the design of your Miro. And so I cooked up this Miro full of different techniques I've figured out to be able to understand what's happening as I watch people use Miro in breakout sessions and activities. And I had this brainwave the night before, and I went, I'll just record them while they're doing it. So I'll get them to do an activity, I'll take a recording, and I'll play the recording back to them. And I'll get them to take notes on everything they can see happening during the recording, and then we'll debrief on that. And it was like, how will I do that? I know what. I'll hook OBS up to Zoom, to Teams. So I sat there for 10 minutes, made a few scenes in OBS. It was like such an easy thing to go record the Miro activity, play back the Miro activity with a switchover scene, no screen sharing required, no playing videos and dealing with lag. just using the virtual webcam in OBS. And it was so easy and so effective. It was probably the first transition of the stuff I've been learning for fun with this group back into using it for a real thing. And then what was fascinating was we had a 5-minute activity followed by a 5-minute recording playback, followed by 30 minutes of debrief of all of the insights they got out of just that 5-minute activity. So it was fun. Thursday is always my favorite day of the week because it starts with a session with that group. Did you remember
Well, you
your
mean
third?
Saturday's not your favorite day of the week?
Nope, we're a different group.
It's a different group. Like and we've spoken, I get so much energy out of these conversations. But when I work with people and I make a difference in the way they're able to succeed at work, particularly Scrum Masters, because I will always, always, always have a passion for Scrum Masters. I believe this is just so important to evolution for the organization. And so if I get a day where I get to feed Scrum Masters and make a difference in a group of Scrum Masters' life, that feeds me much more than stretching myself intellectually.
I gotta agree with how good it feels. That's one thing that I've refused to give up over the years is having 3 or 4 people every year that I mentor into becoming Scrum Masters, and that's always like the priority above mentoring an executive even or anybody else who's asking me, because it's so much excitement, there's so much passion, and at the root, like teams do all the work, so it just matters.
Yeah. Have you remembered your third thing yet, Wolfgang, or are we moving into topic 1?
So my third thing, I now I remember. So I made progress because like a couple of weeks ago, I said I wanted to do a stream in that format about Solution Trains, and so I made progress on setting that up. It will probably take a bit until I can go live with that, but so this is also a highlight. Like usually I taught that just within transformation, that material, or gave a couple of public trainings in the past years. But now streaming that material, I don't know. It's different for me. So I really love to see the reaction of the community. Say, okay, this is probably just weird stuff what Wolfgang is doing, or whether that helps someone getting better at the normal daily work.
It could be both.
Most definitely could be. So we had a couple of topics, lightweight topics to open up with, so that we're not diving straight into the deep end of portfolios or fractal planes again. So Rebecca, you had a 3 books to read. You want to just set the context for us before we start trying to pick 3 books?
Yeah, my amazing spouse has a background in he was a VP of engineering. He's been a senior person in product management. He took some time to be an RTE because he really wanted to see what that role was like. He just accepted a role as a head of agility inside of organization. And we usually have like a no coaching rule in my house. Like coaching only happens if he specifically asked for it, if I specifically ask for it from him. But he did. He said, I've got 3 weeks before I start this new role. I want you to give me a list of 3 books that will help me get started, like running inside of this new job. So I'm curious for you guys, like what's a couple books that you would suggest?
So
Is that
I just want to seek a little bit more. So head of agility is an experienced agilist transitioning to head of.
He is an experienced, I would say, like leader in agile organizations. He's never had the role before of being like a lace leader or being the boss of agilists, with the exception of he had an entire set of agile release trains that like reported to him, including every single role. So all RTEs and everything reported to him at one particular company. In this one, it's specifically like this company that has not ever done anything scaled. They really have team level start to scale their practices, start to grow their practices. So build that from the ground. Does that give enough context?
It does. And now I have to start sorting.
Yeah.
This is a tricky question. So probably I could come up with 50 books, but narrowing that down to 3
Just
is
3.
so what would be the most what made the most impact on my way of working? This is a good question. I really have to think about that.
So
I think you can get a lot of really good advice about how to interact with life out of The Hobbit.
The Hobbit from
We
Tolkien.
also, both of us just reread the entire Lord of the Rings series. So we're halfway there already.
that was a nice stall, Saahil.
You caught me. You definitely caught me, but
I've
it's
sorry, go on.
sorry, go ahead.
No,
All right.
go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's so hard when because there are so many books that I would recommend to someone who's starting out on the journey, who's like, just starting to get into this mindset and way of working. Um, I don't know that there's a ton of books that jump out at me as like, this is perfect for someone who has a deep understanding already and is just trying to expand or um change their management style, especially in the field of agile and DevOps and stuff. I mean, I would go further afield, right? When I start to think about what could we read, I'm not trying to think of books that are like, that's going to make me a better agilist. Although, on a side note, I think this is probably a fun opportunity to plug Industrial DevOps by two of our very, very knowledgeable peers, Robin Yemen and Dr. Suzette Johnson, that just came out a couple weeks ago. And if you do want to deepen your understanding of Agile in a very specific context, it is a phenomenal read. I'm only about halfway through it. I proofread it back in the day, but the final version, I'm only about halfway through, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I think they did a great job. So, Industrial
So-
DevOps, absolutely great.
So let's just before we pass straight through that, right? Because in all honesty, and I've got the book queued on the Kindle because I'm caught between two books at the moment, and I have to finish one before I start the next one. It's next in queue for me. I always, when I think of Robin and Suzette, I go, if they write a book about DevOps, it's going to be DevOps for missile command systems. So knowing that it is a very, like it's DevOps applied in quite unusual circumstances for the reader or watcher who might be going, hey, I'm going to pick that up as a brand new head of agility. What flavor of solutions might you be building if you went, this would be a great book for a head of agility?
So it's funny that you say that because they do talk about missile systems in that book.
Who would have thought?
But so the concept of industrial DevOps, as I understand it, is really about applying Agile to those cyber physical environments that are constrained by the limits of hardware. So when they're talking about agility, they're talking about it in this world of, I have to build some really complex physical system and integrate it with complex software architectural components and make it all function to deliver some outcome. So if you're moving into a head of agility in, any like telecom, in automotive, in aerospace, um, they're all, I think, painting some picture of the kind of stuff you'd need to be thinking about. I did a value stream workshop for the FAA a couple years back, and I wish that industrial DevOps had existed then, because it would have made my life way easier, and talking to them about how to implement Agile in the FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States.
Yeah.
Sorry for our international audience. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are the environments where I think that industrial DevOps would be incredibly valuable, and any analogous environment, healthcare devices, medical devices would be another huge one.
Right.
Anywhere
So
with that
we've
kind
narrowed
of
it down, and we've said industrial DevOps might be in the top 3 if you are building cyber physical solutions.
yes,
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like the later half of that book applies to really anybody because they talk so much about change culture and leadership, and how you change, like tactically, like what you can do in order to get there. Um, but I do think it applies pretty much anywhere when you get to the second half of it. The beginning half is much more focused on cyber physical. I really like Robin's examples all the time because they're ones that when I hear her explain things, she does it so concisely that I can then use that in any environment because they're tangible things that she's explaining. People understand the metaphor she's using no matter what. And she just does a really beautiful job of explaining something really complex in a very simple way. So anytime anybody gets to listen to Robin Yemen or read from her or watch her, I mean, I would recommend it.
So maybe taking a jump on that, now that I've bought enough time while we talked about DevOps
Okay.
for missiles, I've managed to come up with a top one because I had to come back and go when I did this before. Switch.
Nice.
ooh, that's a good book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And say more of the why for you.
So more of the why, and I'm building the Miro as we go, just so we've got the list of the books. So the full title is Switch: How to Change When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. You know, all of this stuff we do is about change. Right? End of the day. And goodness knows how many books I have read about change. But I think Switch was the most easily applicable and powerful in terms of the tangibility of the examples they give and the applicability, right? The whole notion of the elephant and the rider, the battle between the intellect and the emotion, and the need to frame change around emotion rather than logic. And to and you know that adding on, and if you haven't read the book, you've got the rider, which is your intellect, the elephant, which is your emotion. If a rider and an elephant have a disagreement about where to go, you guess who's going to win. But then they bring in the third element of shaping the path to make it easy for the elephant to choose to go there. And the whole book is written around having these 3 concepts in mind when you think about change. And there's a couple of things that really, again and again, I find resonate. One of the examples in the book that you can just come back to again and again and again is sort of helping people to see the reality of their world. And the example they give is the guy in a company that bought gloves, and they bought gloves for their workers. And he was in, some central function, finance, procurement, something like that. I can never remember. And he looked and he went, it's really inefficient the way we buy gloves because all of our factories and states and divisions have their own arrangements with their own suppliers. We pay hugely different rates for all of these gloves. And boy, we could save a lot of money if we consolidated it. And he went and tried to get some support for his idea. And everybody went, you're just a bean counter. You don't know what life's like. and how important having the right gloves is to our workers. And so he went around and he literally collected all the samples of the gloves that their various areas were purchasing, and he stuck big price tags on them, and he piled them on a boardroom table. And then he brought this group of execs in, and the execs are like, what is this? And he said, this is all the gloves we use in our factories. And he's got like 5 pairs of the same gloves, ranging in price from, $5 to $30 a pair. And they're like, why are these same gloves have the same price on them? He said, well, that's what different factories are paying for the same glove. And he just found a way to make the reality so tangible that it triggered action. So I think he uses a lot of very practical illustrations, or they do. So it's 2 brothers who wrote it. They use them again and again and again through the book. The other one that I love is this notion of shining a spotlight, like focusing on finding where good things are happening and recognizing and amplifying the good, as opposed to obsessing about the things that aren't happening. And if you tie that back to the 5th discipline and the book club we're running there about systems thinking at the moment, I'm running some big parallels in my head about the things that they talk about in systems thinking and what turns up when you think about shining a spotlight. So yeah, if you got a head of agility, they're leaning into helping the organization evolve. Helping the organization evolve is helping the organization change. And change is going to be such a crucial skill for them, and Switch just makes it very, very practical and tangible and not overwhelming.
I like that. That's a great suggestion.
I also
I'd actually
like
thought, I'll give you guys a pass for a second. I thought about principles of product development flow, not because I think he understands a lot of the things in there inherently just from doing his jobs in the past. But reading that book and just like really looking at like the depth of thought and the way that he words things, I think is incredible. And it's when I think about like somebody walking into a new company and trying to think about like how do I get started? What are the things I get started on? That one drives for me. It's something I like to reread before I start in a new place too, just to like think about what are the things like, so I'm not focusing on the wrong things right away or getting lost too quickly and like just trying to understand context. But while I'm understanding context in the company, keeping this root of like, in the end, I'm trying to achieve flow. So how do I think about that?
You said he only has 3 weeks until he starts, right?
He and I have a reading competition every year, so we both read insanely fast. We read both of us read about 100
Yeah.
books a year.
I'm really not sure how fast you can read Principles of Product Development Flow. That is one of the slowest going books.
I also picked that one because it's a challenge. Because I was like, let's see like how I can also make this a competition at the same time.
Okay. All
And
right.
it'll slow
All
him down.
right.
So it'll take
I love
me,
the
I'll be able to
energy.
win
Yeah, I do totally agree with your point. I think that Don Reinertsen covers some really powerful principles in that book that are useful for every agilist, whether they're brand new or super deep, and resetting your mindset as you go into a new organization would be great. Speaking of resetting, I think there's what I was thinking about while Mark was talking about Switch was, um, if I was in that position, I would be focused on some of the human elements of being the head of agility as opposed to, the technical practices. And so once I put that sort of frame of reference on my head, 2 books jumped out at me kind of immediately. Um, one is, um, shoot, what's it called? Rising Strong by Dr. Brene Brown, which
great.
is yeah, so I love that book. It sort of extends her work on vulnerability and talks about how you like internally can take time to pause, reflect, and reset when given new information and new challenges, and It's really about self-actualization in a very vulnerable space. So I think that, you know, as you step into a new role in a senior management role as a head of agility, I think that you know it really speaks to some of the emotional intelligence that you would need to be successful in that role. And then the other one that I was like, you know, feeling pretty strongly about is, from a business perspective, The Hard Things About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz.
Oh, tell me more.
So Ben Horowitz is a venture capitalist and entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, and he wrote this book about, you know, it's a fun read because it's like, first it's anecdotal, it's stories from his life, and he frames them all with like quotes from rap songs. Um, so he's like very much injecting
Like
this
Shorty
like
got back.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know about that one specifically, but you know, it's just a very clever, you know, framing for the points he's trying to make, which is about all of the really hard things about making hard decisions. So,
Mm.
you know, it's very focused on how do you manage that as a human. And he's telling stories about things like hiring your friends and deciding whether or not to sell your business, and just, you know, he describes it as the things they don't teach you in business school about running a business.
Yeah.
um and so it's, again, it's very human focused, I think, and it's a pretty cool perspective. So I would recommend that one too.
They're both great. I think he's got something that I hear also from a lot of RTEs often, where when you do like personality testing, he's on the spectrum of like zero empathy and only facts. But he recognizes that. So things like, you know, he knows that although he believes he has got the answer, he's still got to listen and like pause and then let people get things out. Even more so because he knows he's got zero empathy and only lives off facts. And I think there's a lot of RTs I've worked with before that are like, I feel like I will struggle in this job because I'm not empathetic. I, although that is maybe true, I think if you realize it and then take the time to do things like Brene Brown talks about, and really just like know yourself, it might end up being just the best possible because you've also got the logic behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like, I mean, Brene Brown is just a brilliant person, a great human. Her podcast is awesome. I think we've talked about her podcast before on this stream in one of the early episodes. You know, all of her work is really powerful for the human side of transformation.
Just being a person. Yeah.
Yeah, well, being a good person, I think, would be
Yeah.
how I would qualify that. Um,
So you've
What
spent
you
your
got,
three,
Wolfgang?
Saahil. You're done. Wolfgang, where are we at? We will let you have a fourth if you come up with a cracker, though.
So I went through the list just right now of the books that I've read in the last year. So luckily I have that in an app where I can just scroll down and see what really resonates with me. And so one thing that I would personally recommend is the Lean Startup, but not in the way that it's written. Like it's written obviously for product development. Now, the same, for me at least, the same principles apply to organizational development. You have to find meaningful hypotheses, you have to find leading indicators, you have to find measurements of the leading indicators, and on a certain cadence, you have to make decisions and things like that. So just reading that as it is, it's probably not that helpful in that situation. But reading that and always having this second layer in mind, saying, "Hey, how does that apply to organizational development? And what could be a good hypothesis for an organizational change? What could be a good leading indicator? What could be a good measurement for that? And with whom would I make decisions on whether we continue or not?" this is something that I'm missing in most of the transformations that I have been that I've been a part of in the beginning. This like hypothesis-driven optimization, where you not only try to apply certain rules to an organization, but where you take the rules to a next level in trying to optimize the whole. This is the one the next one that I that resonated with me was Adapt by Tim Harford. So I have to say Tim Harford, even though he's not writing anything about agility, is one of the authors that I learned most about agility. And Adapt is just such a good read. It's such a good book, and makes a really good audiobook. You can not every agile book makes a good audiobook, but this one does. It's just a lot of short stories emphasizing a certain aspect of adaptation, like what we're doing with agility. So this is not something that is obvious. Like, okay, now here's the book, and there are ideas that I can apply. It's more like it started. The first time that I read that, this was years ago. Back then I was still with Accenture, and I was in a lot of different. I was the HR methodology lead back then for the German-speaking countries, and I was in a lot of different transformations at the same time, like a couple of days here and a couple of days there. And this book helped me really to see beyond. Like there were, I was driving with my car mainly, or sometimes with the train. And so I listened to that book while I was driving. And whenever I came to the next transformation and was at the client side, immediately I could see things that were resembling what I just heard, even though nothing of what he was writing about is really about HR transformations. And so that brought me to a different level of thinking. Yeah. So
really
this
like those
this
examples. I think it's interesting, like, I'm really excited for him in one point, because instead of, I think sometimes like new agile roles end up having this reporting structure that's inside of what historically was project management or whatever. And one of the reasons I urged him to apply to this one is that it'll actually be reporting to a chief product officer that I've used to work with, who's fantastic, like one of the sharpest product people I've ever met in my life. And she, I think the mixture of what I think about as agile transformation, your goal is never to transform to agile. Your goal is to help that business succeed. And I think having that blend of like lean startup or any of the books that you read, making sure that your focus never becomes like make people more agile, but really your focus is always make sure the business succeeds, and that the business itself is able to be strategically agile, I think is the goal. I love those suggestions, because I think both of them would bring about like that like shared mindset, that I so often don't see in heads of agility, of really focus more on let's go make everybody be agile rather than like let's make the system have agility within it. Those are great. Thanks, Wolfgang.
We
maybe
also have a go ahead, Wolfgang. Sorry.
the last one, the third one. So as you mentioned, Rebecca, that he's fact-based, and I'm too, I have to say. So when Saahil mentioned the human side of it, I was wondering whether I'm paying enough attention to the human side of it. Probably not. I'm trying to, but I'm also very fact-based. And the one book that helped me with like my fact-based approach the most was Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability by Daniel Vacanti. Because like, okay, I studied mathematics or electrical engineering and mathematics. And so this gave me a deeper insight into what it actually means taking scientific measurements and not just like writing a process into columns and giving a couple of WIP limits, but really diving deeper into the mathematics behind all of that. And that helped me a lot in designing much better Kanban systems. So
That
For a fact-based human being like I am, this is the book to go to.
sweet. These are great. Thank you guys.
That's bought me enough time to narrow down my next two.
Can we real quick, Mark, before we go further, just because um, I want to make sure we talk about it. We have, I think, a viewer who's a little bit engaged, and Yuval actually threw into our chat a recommendation for lean change management, innovative practices for managing organizational change.
Ooh,
All right. So let's add that to the
great.
list. Something's gone wrong with my Twitch chat connection. I'm seeing none of it. So
Oh, he put it in. He put it in our Discord.
it's in our Discord. I'm like, I can't see it on anywhere on the Twitch chat. So what is it? Lean.
Lean change management, innovative practices for managing organizational change.
To be honest, this is a book that I've never even heard of, and thank you, Yuval.
I suspect I know who wrote it.
Yeah, I don't know that I am familiar with this book either. I'm going to click visit site on the link he threw in there. It's by
See,
Jason Little.
Yeah, Jason Little. That's where I thought it was. They have heaps of really good stuff. Like great templates, all kinds of great change tools. There's brilliant stuff in it. I'm a huge fan of Jason Little's work. So
Nice.
+1 from me, Val. Join the Twitch chat, mate. I can only watch so many windows at once. So I narrowed down my last two. One of them is Radical Focus,
Ooh,
and it is by, the surname is Wadkey. I think it's Christina.
I'm looking.
I'll get you to correct me if I've got the surname wrong, the first name wrong while I'm explaining it. It's my favorite book on OKRs. And
nice.
I know OKRs, nice buzzword, and in theory, measure what matters is the Bible. What I love about Radical Focus is it's about actionable OKRs. It's about bringing them to life. It's not like what so many people do is write the OKRs, get them pretty, publish them, and then like that's it, except maybe they're on some posters. But she brings in a method for actually basing your week. But she pitches it at a leadership team running kind of like a very lightweight weekly sprint where they start each week going, what are we going to do? What are we going to focus on this week to move us towards our OKRs? And they end every week with a reflection to go, how did it work out? Did we make the movement we thought? What did we learn? What's that going to influence the emphasis we're going to place on next week? So it gives you a really nice way to take some OKRs, bring them to life. It's what I use when I always, when people start with OKRs, I go, start with yourself or start with your own team. Don't start with the whole organization. And I always use the techniques she taught because I find them just so useful. So why would I put that there? Because as a head of agility, he's only going to be as good as his team.
Mhm.
And agile coaches notoriously are not very good at working as teams.
Mhm.
So he gets a kind of double dip because it'll be great for him in terms of thinking. And this is while I was listening to all the other recommendations and adding to my reading list because I haven't read some of them. I was weighing up, was I going to go for The Advantage, the Patrick Lencioni book, which was kind of the string together of all of his other books, which also gives you a nice little kind of leadership focusing mechanism. He runs in The Advantage on like the 6 questions that every member of the leadership team should be able to answer. And I used to like it until I found radical focus, and then I went radical focus is my system. So helps him with his team, also helps him because it's almost guaranteed that if his organization's not trying to figure out OKRs, there will be soon. And it'll be good for him to be in a position where he has learnt experience, because the learnt experience is the first 3 sets of OKRs you write for yourself are terrible. But it's the process of writing them, using them, measuring them, and learning from them that teaches you how to write a good OKRs. So that was one. The other one, and again, as soon as you mentioned he's reporting to Chief of Product, I went, it's got to be Zone to Win.
Oh, say more.
Got to be Zone to Win, because if you come back to that notion that says, actually, our goal is not to get good at Agile, our goal is to build a better business, then he's got to build a language and a way of interacting with the broader organization about what they're doing with business, where they're trying to go, what's driving their strategy, and how they're shaping it. And, you know, if you look at the 1,000,001 business strategy books we've all read, we've already got a nice little kind of grounding in the product. I like the idea of the lean startup read for organizational change, by the way. There's always a temptation with agility to go, it's kind of one size fits all everywhere you look in the organization. And the reality is that the way you might apply agility and the focus of your application in terms of improvement is going to vary depending on the part of the business and where the part of the business is trying to go. And I find the framing of Zone to Win a really useful way to start to paint a picture of the organization. Right? Where are we trying to innovate? Where are we focused on performance? Where are we focused on productivity? What does that mean? What's it going to do to try and shape the areas of focus and the likely stakeholders and metric framing that's going to happen? So I just picked one that went, what lets him start to play in strategy conversations with perhaps some different tools in his tool belt to challenge people's thinking.
I like that. They're awesome. I think it's really be really interesting to think about like different starting points and what 3 books like that would be that starting point. Because I think sometimes people get in this role inside of a organization that's tried to scale something and like that scaling is broken at a given moment, versus like a situation where you're just starting from scratch. Like an organization has grown enough that they know they need to have a next step, and they don't have that next step yet. They don't have the people in place for it yet, and so you're building everything from the net new. Versus like getting promoted into that role when you already have the context within it. And I think from listening to you guys, I think that like list of what do you do in the next few weeks before you start that new role would be really different per situation and per background. This is really cool. Thank you.
So they're all on the Miro. When I get around to doing the note summary for this, I'll add URLs and stick all the links in. I think there'd be an interesting exercise to post-process it and cluster them, because we've got some very strongly emergent clusters in terms of where we all picked.
But what was really funny when you talked about radical focus, so the memories came back when I was listening to that. Actually, I was renting a car in Scotland, and I was doing the battlefield tour from Bannockburn to Culloden, and I was listening to Radical Focus while I was driving the car. Of course, the steering wheel was on the wrong side, and it was really hard to concentrate. But I really loved the book, and when you talked about it, all the memories came back, like driving the car through Scotland.
It's amazing.
All right. So maybe he could read them all. He said he is a fast reader.
Like, here's your 30. You said 30, right? Not 3.
Yeah, very reasonable. 3 from every person that we asked.
Very reasonable, for sure.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
this is good.
sorry, go on, Ria.
I'm good.
So I was figuring that's picking some books. I always knew that'd be a fun conversation. Oh, we've got a comment from Yuval here. The Art of Action by Bungay. And I have no idea what the book is. Have any of you read it?
I
No.
don't think so.
No, well, I guess
No.
it's a bit of post Googling to be done. But
I trust Yuval enough that I will read it now.
so moving on, let's warm up a little bit. We've talked about some favorite books. We've had a lot of action, rapid action in our Discord threads over the last day or so based on something that arose. I presume this came up in your one-day custom portfolio workshop, Saahil.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing this portfolio workshop yesterday, and I had one of my students, brilliant woman, very smart, and she deserves credit for the question. Her name is Jody. So Jody, great question. Um, we were talking about maintaining flow through a portfolio and how a portfolio construct is really designed for owning that process of flow of our significant initiatives through a system. And so I did pull up the um, portfolio Kanban from SAFe, the sort of one that's used on the big picture and in the standard guidance article. And we were talking about, at a high level, this is the process that you may consider as you consider your significant initiatives. And she said, why is done the last step? And I said, what do you mean? Can you say more about that? And she said, well, how do we know that we did the right thing, right? I said to them that our big challenge is ensuring that we're working on the right things at the right time. And she says to me, well, how could we possibly know that we worked on the right thing if we're not checking in or monitoring 6 months after delivery? How can done be the last step? We as a portfolio should have some obligation to evaluate, shouldn't we? And I have always described that, we say the portfolio is done when portfolio governance is no longer required and it's being managed locally. And I said, well, the data comes in from the local sources. It comes in through implementation at the art and the train level, and it rolls up to the portfolio. So we still get some of that information. But now that you've said that to me, I'm really upset that there isn't an explicit call out for monitoring or evaluating the results of our decisions. And I'm going to talk to people. So I sent a message to this group um, in our text chat, and I've got a pretty resounding, yeah, I add that. Yeah, I add that. Yeah, I add that. I call it evaluate. I call it monitor. I call it um Rebecca, I think you had a very fun, I said it was a fun description of done. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That we are happy with outcomes that it's delivered. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean I think both things that you just said really matter. Of what we don't want to do is have LPM concentrating on um like dictating inside of an art all the work. It's irresponsible and it causes too much centralization and it blocks flow.
Mm.
Um, while at the same time, we also need to know that across the full system of value streams in a portfolio that we're still connected to vision and mission and that we're delivering on outcomes we need. So I always looked at it as how do we get the data up to know that we're delivering cross-cutting, significant outcomes to the point that we are happy with them. Not to the point that like we're continuing to do that past the point that we need to. So maybe that's a fuzzy definition of done, but I really like to have something
I
that
think
helps
it's
people have a conversation.
Yeah, I think it's one of those definitions that you kind of leans on the you know it when you see it, right? You're not predefining the characteristics of done up front. You're saying as a portfolio, we should be able to have a conversation and say, "Hey, we're pretty happy with this. We don't need to go any further." And it speaks to, I think, that level of, hey, we do have some responsibility to evaluate the impact of the decisions we made. Um, we were just on Thursday, right? We were when we were talking about the fifth discipline book club, we talked about learning horizons, right? And Sengi talks about you need to broaden your learning horizon or understand the limits of your learning horizon, and that represents sort of the depth that you're capable of learning from, right? At once something crosses out of your learning horizon, you are no longer receiving the information it's sending. It's not present in your brain anymore. And so, yeah, I think very deliberately, we need to ensure that there is some evaluation inside the learning horizon of a portfolio, because the portfolio timelines are so long, right? They work 1 to 3 years in the future as they're, we're talking about evaluating something that we prioritized a year ago or 2 years ago. And it's not that we need to take in that information and rubber stamp it, yes, this was a good investment, or um, we made a mistake. It's bringing in more information and more data to make better decisions in the future. And while I think that I've always just assumed a well-functioning portfolio will do that naturally, uh, yesterday was the first time that someone kind of said, well, we should call that out. And it made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think there's like I think about starting points versus like later on in an LPM implementation. At least my own experiences is my starting point was trying to get the organization I was a part of to just see all of the things that were portfolio level. And once we
Yeah.
saw all the things that people thought was portfolio level, my first visualization of that across everything was something that I like how Cheryl says, like you it was something that they couldn't unsee. Because there were 650 epics. Um, and that's not healthy. And I think as a starting point of being really crystal clear that it is not LPM's responsibility, it's not portfolio leadership's responsibility to track everything, or to create a bucket that is a parent of everything. Which is what I generally tend to find is people have created these features and then they need a way to
Yeah.
manage them and visualize them. And so they've bucketed them up rather than strategically flowing down. So I like that starting point of being clear on like, you are done when it is no longer a concern and there should not be very many things in the system. Later on in the maturity, like when you've narrowed down the things that are actually portfolio concerns, I agree, like that conversation then turns into now how do we make sure that we're measuring successfully? Mark, I saw a company in Australia recently when I was down there that had done a fantastic job of seeing out of all the things that are prioritized at the portfolio level, what's actually getting implemented in the system. And when they first pulled that data, it was like 2% of the work was actually correlated to the highest priority things in the organization. You've got to start to do that, but you still need a starting point that says like we shouldn't have 650 things.
So I'm going to take a flyby on the buckets before I jump to. So my flyby on the buckets is I find buckets very prevalent, right? Kind of big amorphous epics that don't seem to have a reason to live. But I often then find that the reason they exist is because of the funding process, which makes it very, if you're still living in a project or initiative funding land, and you will be earlier in your LPM life, right? Then the overhead usually over getting a business case through makes it prohibitive to run small initiatives. And so you get these bucket epics because people go, if I bundle 20 small ideas together into one business case, that makes it worth the price of admission to get that business case through. And it's anytime you talk to a portfolio group or particularly a enterprise PMO or governance group, that they'll know that's common practice. So sometimes bundles exist because everybody wants a strong, consistent hierarchy. Often they exist because of something in the system that drives their reason for being, which has its own bundle of joy. But I think the thing that I was going to maybe add a little bit here on this notion of the study phase for an epic is it very much depends on where you are on your journey, in my head. Early in your journey, as often as not, either people create epics to represent small projects, or the epics is like one layer down from the projects that sit in a PPM. That's usually the inheritance. And at that point in time, if you work really hard with them, you can start to get some incremental value along the way. But as often as not, the thing that's really being delivered and measured is the epic. At which point, the importance of having a phase like tracking business outcomes is huge, right? Because that's, hey, we got to the end of the epic and we're going to study it for a while because the epic's the thing that was the big learning. And I went all the way back through history as we were jumping around for photos on the Discord threads. I went back to 2012 to the first epic Kanban I ever built. I actually think at the time it might have been the first safe epic Kanban ever built. And this is the last two states on our epic Kanban. And one of them just brings back fun memories of the sense of humor of the people who built the Kanban. In terms of, we didn't have a done column. That last column was our done column. But deployment validation was actually the study period. And if you ran through all the exit policies on deployment validation, it was studying it for 3 months and then closing out with a post-mortem with the epic owner and key stakeholders at the end of that 3 months. And we didn't get to call it done until we'd done the post-mortem and done the study of the difference it made in reality. So it's been there forever for me. The place where I get, and I'm going to maybe be a little bit challenging about this notion of the studying done, is if you think about, and SAFE has actually become quite explicit about this, right? When is an epic done? Right? These days, the explicit definition in SAFE is an epic is done when it no longer needs portfolio governance. So there's this notion, and let's say our idealistic, and perhaps I'll just slip into hippie mode for a minute. Our idealistic in my hippie mode is we don't have a lot of epics. We have lots of valuable features. And each feature is small enough that we can generate value and outcomes, and we're not committing big chunks of money before we get validation and feedback. So we can delegate that down to product managers as a content authority to keep following that through against the arts outcomes. And then they come up with a big idea, and that big idea is like, actually, I've got to spend a lot of money, and I've potentially got to spend a lot of money before I can get validation or make a decision to get off. Therefore, it's become a bigger investment. It's got to come up to the portfolio. It's got to be governed as an epic, right? So there's your kind of trigger decision that's taking you up from feature to epic. And if you look at the way the current sort of formal SAFE definition says, it's like we had something big enough to call it an epic. We lifted it to the portfolio to govern its life cycle as an epic. We held it at the portfolio until we could release it back down. Right? And maybe we did one spin of the wheel, got to the MVP and decided to pivot, killed it, right? Or we got to the MVP and the MVP was so convincing and they got to the point where they could do lots of small feature-based increments to it that we went, okay, we're done with it as an epic when we're done with the MVP. Or maybe we went, no, the next chunk of money we're going to spend is still pretty big and we might need to make another decision point. So we're going to hold at the portfolio level for a little while longer before we release down to features. So if you're living in that land, you're living in a land where arguably there's a lot of epics you don't finish.
Mhm.
Right? You move them in big chunky land for a little while and then you head them back down into art land where they move as lots of valuable features. And if you think about, you drop epics for a moment, you think about how do you govern features through a portfolio lens? You govern features through the KPIs or OKRs or whatever you've set for the development value stream or for the art. Because the question is the product manager doing a good job? Product manager is doing a good job if the benefits or the impacts of the features add up to moving the needles that you've set for the train. So there's a lens of study, which is the lens of study is how's the train performing when I add up the impacts of all the features it's doing, which provides me that kind of more strategic post-mortem as opposed to the post-mortem that comes along with an epic. So there's an argument to me that says if I'm really running Matura and I'm running the kind of epic life cycle as it's formally and safe right now, which is it's big, we lift it while we're spending big chunks of money, govern it the portfolio until we feel like we can release it. I'm doing live study when I make pivot persevere decisions. And I'm doing live study when I make release it decisions. But then arguably, when I think in that kind of long range study, the long range study meaning is really the question of the additive impact of the feature study on the overall performance measures for the train. At which point I would argue that there comes a moment you kill your tracking business outcomes column from your epic Kanban because your maturity has passed the need for it because of the place that you shifted your study focus to, whilst acknowledging
Yeah,
some arts and some organizations might never get there. So
Mark, I think the first thing I want to say is you have this way of explaining concepts that just makes me feel like I'm learning. Like I can just sit and listen to you talk about something for a while. I don't want to say it puts me back in the mindset of being in school because I didn't pay attention to my teachers in school. But I imagine that this is what it should have felt like. Um, so there, that was that's a really interesting point you made. Um, and I think it goes back to what I was saying is I think that, highly mature portfolios or well executed portfolios do that intrinsically as part of just the portfolio processes. They know, right? They know about the big things that were relevant to them and even after it's over, they know whether or not that was a good decision or not. Um I guess my question would be, is there harm in leaving a evaluation state on the board even when they're mature? Right? Like you said, you said it would naturally go away. Well, why?
so
Right? Does it have to? I mean, I understand what you're saying about the behavior, but
the
as
question to
a
me
as a
isn't
structure, yeah.
it's not does it go away so much as is it fulfilled by something else? So if you think about that study and what is tracking business outcomes, it is, are our big bets paying off? Right? When we made a big bet,
Yeah.
we made a lot of promises about what would happen if we indulged in the bet. And we want to get to the end and say, did it pay off? If you have an art that is capacity funded or, funded as a value stream, and it is dominantly shipping independent features that don't need to come up and run life as epics, you're not as a portfolio going to govern the features. You're going to govern the art's performance against the art's measures. And what's going to happen is that your focus on measuring the arts needles is going to subsume your focus on measuring the epics. So if I let me give a really I'll give two easy examples. There was a train at Australia Post. I picked this one because it's in the public domain. They published their case study. Their key performance indicator was first-time delivery. I don't know, do you have it in the States where somebody tries to deliver a parcel to you and you're not home, so they leave you a card, and then you've got to ring them and figure out
that
where they've
happens.
taken it, and right, okay.
Yep.
So their job and the number one success measure that they had as a train was get rid of those. And they had a full financial model that went, every time we go 1% reduction in the missed deliveries like that, this is how many $1 million it saves us as a company, and this is what it does to our customer sentiment. And although they had the occasional big initiative come through, most of their work was just shipping features that moved that needle. And the way that their performance was evaluated was, how many % did you move that needle last PI? Right? So they looked at every feature and went, oh, we think this feature is going to increase response rates. You know, when we spend a text and ask if you're okay if we leave it on the doorstep if you're not home, how many people respond to that? Or, you know, and they have really great discipline around their feature metrics, but the portfolio governance wasn't what features did you do? It was, how did you move the needle? It cost us this much to try and train this PI. This is the benefit we experienced as a company. You're never going to, until you build that kind of discipline, you're never going to get away from the point that says actually doing epic study periods, postmortems, and tracking epic business outcomes is needed. And I can tell you, because I have the battle scars from being younger and more foolish, and this is not me telling you you're young this time, Saahil. It was me being younger and foolish, because hippie me wanted to get rid of epics. And I moved over aggressively to get rid of epics before we were ready to, a number of times. And it wasn't me who paid the price. It was my clients that I was coaching who paid the price when they had big messes to clean up later. Right. So there's nothing I'm saying here which is move fast to that. You've got to build the maturity to do it. But what you find is, and why this goes away as a column, you build the maturity that says, we know what our KPIs are as a train or as a developed value stream, or we know our OKRs. We've got great discipline around what our features are adding up to, and we've got great discipline on our features. Therefore, we start to become much less obsessed with epics.
I think one thing, I mean, we're always challenged by how many words we can put inside of an article, right? But Mark just gave beautiful explanations of the last 3 sentences inside of the portfolio Kanban, like backlog article, that explains the done column. Like, it is exactly the way that we explain it, is either no longer it's in done because it got put in the trash can in some other state, like we proved that we didn't need to keep doing it, or that hypothesis was proven and LPM has determined that additional portfolio governance is just no longer required. So something could stay in that column because it does require governance for as long as a company needs it to, but we're not defining exactly what that means from that need. And then that last sentence that Mark explained very gracefully over about 10 minutes, about whenever an epic is no longer a portfolio concern, leading indicators, value stream KPIs, guardrails are used to keep the LPM informed of the progress. That's why we got that there. So I do think, like, visually, the picture that we use to train doesn't explain that, and as well as we're not able to use 2,000 words to explain one column. side of an article or nobody would read them. But mindset is exactly the way that Mark came out with it just now. I'm not even going to explain articles anymore. I'm just going to let Mark do it for me. Here you go. I carry you around in a pocket.
So let's just run full circle here, because Rebecca's trying to help me fix something where I've got far too many words and I'm really struggling to cut down the number of words and explain it. So life is all about balance.
It's hard. I mean, it's incredibly hard to be succinct and clear so that people can actually use what you're saying. I mean, this week, how we started off, like my thing I'm working on started with 4,500 words. I've got to get it down to 2,000. Incredibly difficult. It's also what we have to do. Or just carry Mark around. No, he could be like, here's wisdom. Let me drop it.
Oh, here's a million and one battle scars. So I feel like I've just done one of my favorite numbers on you, Saahil.
You mean where you drop a bunch of knowledge and break my brain? No, it's so valuable for me, and I really appreciate the conversation and the perspective. I think that I almost want to say I agree, right? I agree with all of that, and I think that how we execute is clear. I think our challenge is how we communicate these concepts. And like Rebecca said, it's in the article, but it could still use some fleshing out. It's hard to communicate it via a picture. It's hard to communicate it in just 2,000 words. It took Mark, 10 minutes to explain this concept gracefully. And so, I almost, in my head, what I am now struggling with or thinking through is, how do I take these things that I know, that I feel are true, and effectively communicate them in a way that is consumable quickly by someone who doesn't have the knowledge and experience that we do, right? And I know that that's something we all struggle with, right?
I'll give you the short version of that one, Saahil. That's a conversation that you will never have with 4 out of 5 of your clients.
That's true. I've been teaching,
if you drop that concept too early, you break their heads, and it's just far too big a leap for them to go from where they are to where you're talking. Right? The Kanban that Rebecca picked up, and I think you said you grabbed this Kanban from Brian Tucker, Rebecca?
Originally, he had done a talk that just really made everything really clear for me at the time. And so I formed that Kanban off of his talk and then ran LPM with it and adjusted it into what it ended up becoming. Yeah.
So I would say for the first 2 years of most portfolios' lives, that's going to be the Kanban, and you're not going to have any of the philosophical discussion I just had. But then, if you're me, you're going to spend that whole first 2 years going, when can I start having that discussion? How can I help them grow to the point where we're ready to have that discussion? Sorry, Rebecca.
I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I find it's a lot easier sometimes to write and be articulate than it is to talk and be articulate, at least for me. Because you get more time, right? You're not on stage trying to do it. And I was watching a talk by someone about being articulate, and I really like how he said, like, really try to find the things that just bother you in the world, like the questions that continue to be an itch for you, and write about them every day. And in the act of writing, the way that you explain things will start to be more concise. The word choice that you use will be more formed because you will have found the words that you need to be articulate about something. And you can't do that for everything. Like, you can't do that for every single topic. So what are those things that just like are your biggest things that you personally want to throw your heart and your brain into? Insanely articulate about those things, and then The other things you can be knowledgeable about and make sure that you spend 3,000 words instead of 2 to explain them, but what's your focus areas? Wolfgang, it's one of the things I like so much about you is you've decided your focus area very clearly. You have this deep passion in one area. You are articulate about it because you have spent the brain and energy over years and years making sure that you are. And I think we all have to do that all the time. Something I've been thinking very deeply about of what are those things? Because it can't be everything in the world. That's really hard.
Yeah, and
I think
it is hard. Now I jumped over you, Sahil, but it is really hard because, like, I of course I'm an SPCT, but I'm also a Kanban teacher from the Kanban University, and I was also on my way to becoming a PST, which, like, the last step I never made, but I made all the certifications and things, and now I had to drop a lot, and I really cared for the other stuff. And now, when I'm listening to you talking about LPM, I'm not that well versed in LPM. Of course, I could throw in ideas, but I'm rather listening to what you all have to say about LPM because you probably have more experience than I. Of course, I have a certain connection to LPM. Whenever I'm setting up a solution train, this is usually steered by a kind of LPM. But this is hard and it's painful. It's painful every day because there are so many books in my shelf which I have to deprioritize, saying, is that really my area of focus? And so I thank you for
Talk about a
appreciating this,
first world
Rebecca. But
problem.
it's this is really hard to do, and I'm struggling with that on a daily basis. Sometimes, and this is true, sometimes I'm so fed up with that I'm just like fleeing in my world of fantasy role playing just to get something different and then come
Me
back to
too.
the topic.
That's why D&D exists. Say it.
Sahil, I jumped over your words when you wanted to say something.
Well, uh, it is not that important, I think, but I just wanted to say I was really impressed with Rebecca's turn of phrase on you can't be everything everywhere or whatever it was that you just said. It really bounced around my brain a little bit. I was like, that sounds really nice because it has a very powerful, evocative imagery in my head. Um, yeah, and it just feels very true, right? You can't be an expert in everything to everyone at all times.
Now I have a question about LPM, if you allow me to ask a question.
Fire away, Wolfgang.
So, like, of course, I'm looking at the whole LPM stuff from the solution train perspective, and what I want the usual thing. So, like, for me, the only meaning of LPM. I mean, that this is maybe a little bit over exaggerated, but to a degree, it's true. The only meaning of LPM is how does that help me with my solution train? If it helps me, great. If it doesn't help me, I don't care. Now, with the solution trains that I set up, I usually want to go in a direction which, like in team topology, is pointed out so beautifully, saying when you are developing software, it's not that you are delivering something; it's a continuous conversation that you have with the users. So you're removing software from the field, you're changing your UX, you are bringing in new functionality because you have this constant conversation on a technical level with what do they want to have, what would maybe be better for them, how can we evaluate that. And so for a lot of things, especially when it comes to continuously evolve live systems, for a lot of things, you're never done. You're always like trying to make things better. When you have a web page and you have a lot of people interacting with that web page, now you will probably not have a new done version of that web page at any point in time, but you're trying to evolve it on a regular basis, and you're trying to come up with new ideas, evaluate these ideas, and so you're working in small batches so that you are like progressing all along the way. Now, I'm understanding that, of course, LPM has a meaning for making big bets and having big chunks of things that you want to get out. And for me, these are like two ends of the spectrum. On the one side, you have the LPM guys thinking about, okay, what can be our next cash cow or whatever, or what can be the next big thing that we can bring to the market. On the other side, and this is also like a valid approach, I would say, for earning more revenue for a company or bringing out new products, is saying, how can we change the thing that we have in a way so that it's like better, like it fits better to the needs of the people who are using that. Now, for such a thing, like where I want to go, now I come to the point with the question. For such a thing, like when you continuously evolve life systems because you're not trying to bring something new into the market, probably there is a certain kind of governance necessary on LPM level to steer the whole thing in the right direction, especially when you have several solution trains underneath. But how would that be different in like what we just discussed with the portfolio Kanban and the done column?
So, I'm going to throw to Rebecca first because she has a family calling on her, but she doesn't want to leave before she gives you a few words of wisdom. So, Rebecca.
Thanks. Very kind of you. I see portfolio or multiple portfolios has this amazing potential. So an organization that is really paying attention to today's world is changing all the time. And when you've crafted a portfolio strategically, you've very intentionally said like these value streams should be pulled together and governed together and funded together because the potential of them being together makes it so that my company is competitive. Like any single value stream could produce something amazingly effective all the time. But the potential of pulling these things together makes my company go towards my overall vision and mission in a differentiated way than it would if they were separated out. And I think that potential is the strength. So when I think about like solution trains, very intentionally every year I was saying, if I took this solution train and this solution train and I now put them into a portfolio together, what's the potential that we could create for the world by pulling these things that look very different and look like maybe they shouldn't be together so that we have a customer experience across our realm of our ecosystem that is actually more meaningful than it was the year before, more strategically valuable, more differentiated, more competitive. I love portfolio because of that, because it lets you really look at all your different puzzle pieces and pull together an organization that has the potential to make the world better because of how you've mix and match things. And at the scale of the companies that we all work with, that's a real truth. Like they're either going to do the same thing they've always done, put out a product that is helping and it's building revenue, but it might not be exponentially improving the world because they haven't done the due diligence to do the right blend of things. So that's why I like it even more so than the funding problem, which the funding thing is helpful. It's like making people happier and more joyful at work, which is great when you start to fix that. But from the business perspective of not only making the people more joyful because you're actually working in a clear direction in a clearly funded way, making your customers like just be wowed and amazed because you were able to strategically look at all the things. That's the power, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. That helps. Really, I love how you put that into words. And I will go back when the stream is on the website and listen to that again.
Thanks. I'm gonna go be a stepmom, which and help my kiddo carve pumpkins for Halloween. So
Thank you for joining us, Rebecca. It's nice to have a new voice.
yeah, thank you all. Appreciate it. It's really fun.
Enjoy your Saturday with the family.
Yes. Pumpkin carving is always fun. Bye.
Bye. So then there were three. But Yuval and Eric are still around. Let me just
I love it.
quickly adjust to the fact that Rebecca's not here anymore. And yes, we have switched. All right, so I'm going to hold my answer because we have a comment from Yuval. Let's process that. I see it as a spanning palette of organizing around value patterns that we can use depending on the level of coordination, cohesion needed. Solution Trains and another, art/team is another. I'm going to take that one and run with it because I think it probably plays to where I was going to go. So if you look at portfolio and you look at the three dimensions of LPM, there is an aspect, and there's always been an aspect that says there's an element of the portfolio's job, which is coordination. Right? In the days before we had large solutions, it was if multiple trains need to coordinate with each other, LPM's there. And it's there to provide a systems level view above the arts. And for me, a lot of things come when you bring a solution train in, where you're basically saying the coordination between a particular group of arts is so intense in terms of their need for alignment, collaboration, planning alignment, planning conferences, all the other, the really tight glue because of the level of connection between the trains. You go, I'm going to put in the solution train as the construct to do that. And there's an argument then that says what you've done is you've simplified the complexity view at the portfolio level.
Mhm.
Because if you go back to the beginning, you said, I've got arts of trainers that they hide complexity. The portfolio doesn't need to worry about all the teams, it worries about the arts, right? And that enables it to have a more strategic focus and more strategic set of conversations because these arts hide complexity. I'd argue again that a solution art hides complexity. And because so much of where, from an execution perspective, if a portfolio needs to get involved in coordination, it tends to be around things like dependencies. When a solution train comes into life with its own coordination, that actually lightens the coordination load on the LPM. And it allows, the less that an LPM has to get involved in coordination, the more it can focus on strategy. So, and again, kind of back to Rebecca's thinking is, what's great about a portfolio is you've got a spanning view of a bigger portion of the system. And you can see things from the span of the portfolio that are difficult to see looking out from inside a solution art.
Mhm.
And I think the LPM always has something to offer a solution art in terms of saying, with my greater view, I can see opportunities, identities, and synergies that perhaps you can't. But I also think, and I picked a couple of your kind of keywords in terms of what does an LPM do for us in the beginning. I think there's often a misconception that all epics are born in the LPM.
Yep.
And I think there's a mental wiring that says you look at it, and of course the LPM's at the top of the picture. That must be where stuff comes in. And we've had that discussion before. But in practice, if you tie this back to the sort of some of the earlier discussion here, and you say, an epic is something that quite often will originate in an art or a solution art, but it's significant enough in nature of the type of spend, the size of the spend, and the ability to exit the spend that it needs that extra governance. So my experience with solution arts is generally they're generating their own epics, right? The solution managers, solution architects, they're generating the epics.
Yeah.
But they're big, beastie things. And the portfolio lay is there to support the effective governance and due diligence around the kind of size of spends that are involved in these epics as they come through, not to necessarily impose their view of what the epics should be. And it's not to say there won't be outside epics come the direction of a solution art, but I think in terms of that epic lifecycle stuff, it's raising the bar on the level of diligence and standard. But I've never worked with solution art that didn't drive 90% of its own epics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I'm with you.
So agree, right? And I would, I think it all just comes down to the framing. Because just like I think there's a misconception that portfolio is the source of all epics, I think there's a misconception that an LPM team is a discrete entity that exists separately from the things it supports and governs. And the second Wolfgang asked his question and Rebecca responded, Mark, your response, I've been mapping it to this in my head, and I haven't it sounds right to me, is the level of coordination and governance that portfolio would offer a solution train, because a solution train is a significant investment, right? We talk about epics as significant investments. A solution train is a significanter investment for a large organization, right? Because you're putting in structures to support that flow of combined value. The governance, the coordination that an LPM team offers a solution train is putting the solution architect, solution train engineer, and solution manager on the LPM team. That's it. And that is how the portfolio offers that wider guidance Mark was talking about is, hey, we might see synergies that you don't because we have a higher view. The reality of that is we bring those people into the conversation so they can hear about the other stuff and they can connect the synergies. No one's going to come in and impose a synergy on a solution train. They're going to offer new information to the solution train leadership for them to pursue their own opportunities and innovation. So even when we say, the solution train is the source of its own epics, I completely agree with you. And you could argue that those are originating at the solution train, or you could argue they're originating in the portfolio, but even if they're originating in the portfolio, they're originating from the solution manager and the solution architect. And I would argue that they use their own discretion and governance model for the solution train to decide, hey, do I even need to run this solution epic by the rest of the portfolio team or not? And there are some epics that they'll prioritize that they'll say, nah, we got this, right? This is wholly owned and contained by our solution train. And we know that there's no wider implication or synergy. And sometimes they'll say, hey, this epic we're considering might have an impact on this other thing we heard about at our last portfolio sync or strategic portfolio review. And let's talk about it with everyone. So yeah, to me, there's a level of framing here, but I completely agree with the practice that you're describing.
Thank you. I just had while you were speaking, I had to write something down because I must not forget that. So I mean, for me, essentially, like when I'm talking about the difference between a solution train and LPM, is like this borderline is where I'm usually saying when we are like first we are discussing about priorities. Of course, there is a certain capacity discussion involved with every priority that we have. But on the portfolio level, we usually discuss more about priorities than about capacity. When we are bringing that down to a solution train, then the capacity discussion takes over. We still have priorities, but it's more important. Like, how much capacity do we have? How can we map what we want to do to the capacity on the long run, when we will be done with something, when we can deploy or deliver something. And so for me, this borderline is, where do I focus on? Do I focus more on priority than I'm, from my point of view, on portfolio level, or do I more focus on capacity, and then I would be on solution train level? And how I understood you, Saahil, and I don't know whether I understood you in the right way, is saying, okay, when I have priority discussions on the portfolio level, it can be something that is only facilitated by people on the portfolio level, but actually, say I have 2, 3, or 4 solution trains underneath the portfolio, I bring in the people from the solution trains who are actually discussing what is meaningful for them on the priority level. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely, right. And you know, the functioning of a portfolio is so interesting because when you start to build out a full LPM team, right? If you look at all the functions that SAFe describes, the governance, the coordination, and you look at those responsibility circles that SAFe has, right? And you say, well, the RTEs and Scrum Masters are responsible for this, the VMO and LACE is responsible for that, the executives here, right? But once I start to put it all together, RTE and Scrum Master communities of practice, architects, LACE and VMO, enterprise executives, business owners, my LPM function, my LPM team starts to get to be like 15, 20, 25 people. And not all of them meet for every single conversation. Um, and so you're starting to focus your discussions and bring in the relevant stakeholders. And what you might find is that VMO or LACE may step in to really be the facilitators. But, you know, when we're having a sync focused on these challenges, or these are the things that have bubbled up during execution that we know are going to be on the agenda, we're going to make sure that the right representatives from the solution trains are present for a solution train conversation. And you know, as you get to be more and more mature, you may start to extend past some other conversations, right? We might say, hey, the solution train leaders are invited to all portfolio conversations because they really are key members of the portfolio team if this portfolio contains 3 or 4 solution trains. And as long as I'm sitting here talking about role collaboration and portfolio, I would love to highlight one challenge, right? Because when you go from solution manager to epic owner, that's an easy kind of trade-off to make, because for the solution train epics, the solution manager is probably going to be the epic owner. But when you go from solution architect to enterprise architect, you might start to have some challenges and overlap in responsibility, because and I hope I don't offend any enterprise architect when I say this, there are very few enterprise architects I know that can effectively govern the architecture of multiple solution trains.
That's
And so you,
I I'm gonna suggest that's a rabbit hole.
well,
And
it is. It
I'm
is. I
gonna
don't want to
put
dive into it.
I'm gonna put Safe's architect levels on our streaming backlog.
Oh yes,
That's a great
let's
idea.
do that.
Sorry, I was just trying to give some color and flesh out Wolfgang's question around
Yeah, I was,
who's
and
coordinating and
you were
collaborating.
doing a great job, but I could see, I breathed in, I watched Wolfgang breathe in. We're about to go enterprise architect land, and that was very risky territory. Please continue.
But okay, so let me summarize in one sentence. The solution train leadership team are the experts in running their solution train, and the portfolio should not overstep on that.
Thank you. This is something that, if you allow me, I will take that on one of my slides.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think playing with that notion of the portfolio as a collaboration, right, is a really helpful metaphor. But I think the other thing, and I'm just going to kind of highlight a comment Yuval dropped in the chat, which is, his comment was he'd rather see the portfolio focus more on OKRs and KPIs than epics. And I think there's a very true thing that says it's easy for a portfolio to get caught in the weeds. The more lightweight the portfolio's role is on the epic front, the more it's able to focus on the strategy front. And, to be honest, I have a brutally allergic reaction to the fact that epics wind up in the strategy dimension of the portfolio.
There were so
So
many.
do you get
Sorry.
hives, or does your throat close up? What happens when an epic ends up?
Well, I don't personally think of epics as strategy, right? I think of epics as ideas that might fulfill elements of strategy. It's part of, and we've been here before, right? The lopsided nature of the safe portfolio dimensions. Do you need the right type of governance and decision making around epics? Yes, you do. You are choosing to spend large amounts of money, and often to start down the path of an epic, you've got to spend a lot of money before you've got an option to step off without writing off.
Yeah.
That for me is one of the biggest triggers of the feature versus epic thing. Is if I build a feature and it doesn't do well, I've spent a little bit of money, I've built the feature and it didn't do well, I can stop and not build any more features like that. I've got no write-off. I can still capitalize the feature even if it didn't do what I was hoping for it to do. And I can step off that path without significant expense. But if the MVP for an epic is $2 million, right? I can't step off the path for $2 million. That's the first time that I can get off without a write-off. And that's a lot of the way that I think about epics, because I'm thinking about your ability to exit a position. I always go back to the kind of investment portfolio metaphor with portfolio. Is when I buy a share against a hypothesis. My hypothesis is, based on what I understand of this company, it's going to fulfill this element of that area of my portfolio strategy, and it lines up well with that. So I take a position. And then if the hypothesis is invalidated, I exit the position and I sell the share. Right? Now, the price might have gone up or it might have gone down in between, but there's very rarely a world, unless I've really made a mistake, where I'm writing off 100% of the cost of the share when I decide to exit the position. And when you think about epics, right, and let's say you mentally translate epics to projects, why do not many projects get cancelled? Not many projects get cancelled because to cancel a project, you've got to take an unacceptable write-off. You've got to sell your share for $0. The only way you can avoid that is if you're delivering it incrementally, which is what the kind of MVP cycle forces us to do, to say, hey, you don't have to spend all the money on the epic before you've got a chance to get out of it. You spend this far and then you can get out. And that's where I think of the kind of epic governance aspects of the portfolio is, validating the hypothesis against the strategy and validating the risk involved in the position they're taking in terms of let's say, the liquidity of the position. Because again, that's one of the things that they would look at in a share trading strategy is how liquid is the share? If I want to exit, does it trade well? Because that might influence the size of the position I take. You can always tie the two things back together. So, but then we're CapEx, OpEx, and write-offs and write-downs. So,
Thank you. I have to admit, today something changed for me in the discussion that we had. So there was this time it was different than any time we discussed before. Like before, I was just really happy that we had this conversation, and I was working mainly like alone on my stuff and try it out with clients. And I was really happy that we had this discussion round where I could just throw in my ideas and see what comes back. But today it was different because it felt for me much more like a quarry where you have a large rock where you break out stones and you will use that like as a mason to build something. And this was the feeling that I had. And it was stronger the more we discussed today. It's like, and I made real notes here on my paper, but I also made notes just to myself in my mind, say, okay, these are things that I really have to bring to my slides or that I somehow have to incorporate into the training. So sometimes I'm just writing slides because I want to have a different storyline and like teaching, implementing SAFe in a different way. And so I'm sitting down trying to come up with like slides on my own, not that I'm presenting that, but just that I get my storyline clear how I'm presenting something. And so this is different now. I don't know why it changed today, but it definitely changed for me today. So I'm really appreciative. Is that a word? Yeah, hopefully. Appreciative of the stones that I can take with me and build something of it, like after we close that session. So I don't know why that happened today, but it definitely happened today. Thank you.
I think we're, back to Eric's comment a week or two ago, we're building a shared language. We're
Yeah.
getting to the point where we've got enough shared language going on that we're able to start to go deeper more rapidly in conversations, is my feeling.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it's a lot of fun having 2 extra people on chat with us at the same time. Extra voices.
Thank you, Yuval, for staying with us, and Eric.
So we've run a long time. I feel like it is too late to open the LPM bootcamp, but I might give a sneak peek, just so we've got a clue on next week. So
Sounds great.
I can tell you my bootcamp, and I'll give you the kind of genesis of it before I show you any of it. The genesis, I have, over the last few years, I've actually wound up doing a lot of portfolio work in companies that are not using SAFe or not using much SAFe. But it's probably been the most interesting portfolio work that I have had a chance to do. And one of the things I think that's appealing about LPM is if you think about systems thinking and the notion that you plug a team or a train or a construct into a system, and it's only going to be able to do as well as the system allows it to do. When you sit in LPM, you get to change the system. And it's kind of interesting to go, what can you drive evolution at the portfolio level that allows you to move towards better opportunities at the execution level. And so I've been down this path of going, all right, we've had a few portfolios, and I've always run with the pattern that says portfolio is lean, it's not agile. I generally the more I zoom out on the safe big picture, the more I'm saying I'm having a lean discussion rather than an agile discussion. And I know lean, for me, lean is about revolution, not evolution. You might install a team, you might install Scrum, you might install a train, right? Because it's kind of a Kakaku change. When you're putting in portfolio management, for me, it's not generally something you install. It's something that you evolve. And you look and you go, where are you? And how do we build a picture of where you're at the moment? And then how do we use that to trigger a path forward? And I've taken this path enough times now that I go, these are all the things I do at the beginning. I build these pictures. We establish these maps. We understand these things. And once we've got the grounding there, we pick the path of the things that we're going to start try and start changing. But we've built this thing in their world. And I had somebody reach out. It's an organization. They weren't doing safe. Had bits of safe. And they wanted an LPM class. And I had the chat with them and asked them some more questions about where they're at. I was like, oh, man, just don't think the LPM class is right. Because so much of the LPM class kind of assumes safe, assumes you've got arts. It assumes you might be able to have a discussion about participatory budgeting. It's like you're here and we're going to take you there in that world where you've got trains and you're sticking a portfolio on top of the trains. And so I got off the call and I pulled up the LPM courseware because I went, could I, with enough creativity and whiteboard time, use the LPM course to give them the conversation they wanted to have, needed to have? And I got to the end of it, I went, no, I just couldn't. I just can't figure out a way to bend the standard course to their needs. And I went, yeah, maybe I could turn my regular pattern into a bootcamp. And why not? So tested it, they bought in. That was the genesis. So where did the bootcamp come from? And the whole goal, and I will say right up front, how many slides did you have in your 90-minute presentation, Wolfgang? Was it like 150 slides in 90 minutes or was something crazy recently?
Yeah, a bit more, yes, but
Something like that, right? So,
yeah.
so I had 90 slides for 2 days. And that included my filler slides. So I thought just in the kind of quick run through of it here, what I'd do is I will just go into screen mode. And if you're on the Miro, I'll drag you to where I am. So, of course, open with an introduction and what are we looking at? What's a portfolio? What are the key portfolio life cycles before we start talking about lean? What are the key lean concepts and how might we apply them back to the portfolio? And really digging into the notion of the cyclical nature of portfolio evolution, right? Most portfolios in the beginning, you run an annual cycle. It's your financial year. And there are things about the portfolio that only get to change on financial year boundaries. And that informs everything. So that was the intro. And we'll dig into a little bit of that when we open it next week. Next module, shaping portfolio strategy. So looking at allocation-based investment tools, investment guardrails, horizon-based thinking, all that kind of stuff. And then mapping the collaborations, funnily enough, Saahil, between the portfolio team, their partners and stakeholders. I had a little bit of a chuckle as you started down that path. So that's kind of what is strategy. What's the book of work? So book of work, common term over here. Also might be called your investment slate. Contains epics, features, and other beasts. So looking at the book of work, and really this course is built safe agnostic because obviously these guys have some safe, they're not all safe. Other organizations I've been doing it have been same. So what I tend to do is go, here's some great reference material in safe because nobody has reference material in LPM as good as safe has at the moment. But let's talk about a concept. Let's then talk about the way safe applies that concept. And then let's talk about how we bring it to life in your world.
Yeah.
So it runs through the hierarchy of the book of work, the life cycles, the layers, the artifacts that move through it, key accountabilities related to the portfolio items in the book of work as they move through life, and visualization in terms of strategy, layer, and life cycle. Then moving on to operating and governing. So role of the portfolio team, operating and governing, the balance between fixed and flexible, and maintaining roadmaps, and setting up your key kind of quarterly rhythm. Most of it's based in this concept that says, as a portfolio, you'll have an annual rhythm and a quarterly rhythm, and there's kind of different things that are driving in those two rhythms, but they're the heartbeat of what you're running as a portfolio. And then the close of it is pursuing perfection. Surprise, surprise. So we dig into flow accelerators and their application of the portfolio, applying waste thinking through the lean portfolio management lens, and then, starting where you are. So the concept of the boot camp is it's generally about 1 or 2 slides and then a big activity. Because what I want to do is say, here's some ways of thinking about it. Now build your world as it relates to these things. Here's some ways of thinking about the next thing. Now build your world as it relates to this thing. Safe might call it epics, features, and stories. You might call them apples, bananas, and jelly beans. Don't care. Let's agree on what your hierarchy is, and then let's actually map your book of work there. So we begin with what are the strategy tools, and then can we map your strategy? Then we go, what's your book of work? Map it to hierarchy, and then map it back to strategy, so that we're starting to get a relationship built between the book of work and the strategy. What's your annual rhythm that shapes your book of work? What's your quarterly rhythm that executes on the book of work you shaped last year? What's the interrelationship between the two? And how do you start to fly them through? And again, it's kind of build a picture of as is. Let's look at it through the lens of waste and look at maybe what the next to be is. So the idea at the end of it is you're building, basically an Abaya room around you as you go with each activity to map out what is your portfolio. And then, the last half hour, 45 minutes is action planning on what are the first things we're going to take to start to drive the evolution journey. So that's the bootcamp. Taught it once. It was a lot of fun. Worked really well. Some great feedback. I have many iterations planned. And next week, I guess we'll take a closer look.
I have questions on that. First, did you ever think about making that a simulation like the Safe City simulation for portfolios?
Not so far.
Okay.
But
And
is
second,
there a good
yeah.
chance that'll happen one day? Yes, there is.
And the second question that I have is, I suppose you said you did that once, probably within a transformation, not publicly, right?
It was private, yeah.
Yeah. So do you have an intent to run an alpha class for the community where you get a lot of feedback?
I
If
never,
so, I would be happy to be part of that.
I didn't design it to run public because the whole design of it. So what I always do internally and what drove the class, internally, we go through and we go, okay, let's build your as is picture. And we pull apart what their current book of work is. We look at their PPM system and their Jira or equivalent, and we go, what's the connection or lack thereof between what's in PPM and what's in your agile books? And we just build this picture, and then we go, what's the strategy you're telling your board you're following, and how can we take everything that we've just assembled and correlate that back to the strategy you're communicating to the board? And so we just go through this world of going, okay, here's the strategy you're telling the board you're following. Here's what's in PPM. Here's what's in Jira. And this is the connection that we're able to build together between all of those things. Right? And then we overlay on that, here's your annual funding life cycle. This is where you are in at the moment. And, there are some things you can change based on what you've already got and some things you won't change until the start of your next fin year. So we've got another piece of the context. And that becomes a part of your planning for evolution because you go, as an example, generally most Australian enterprises, I begin my financial planning for next year 3 months into this year. Right? It's about a 9-month process to form your annual plan. And if you want to change something, right? Let's say introduce a new funding construct, change something about the allocations, change any significant change. I've got to be ready to do that 9 months before the end of fin year. So and if I took it back into product management, market rhythms, right? But it becomes powerful because what you're doing is you're not going in and saying, here's a recipe or here's all the theory. You're going, here's some ideas. Let's look at your world through those ideas. You can't do that public because people are never going to build their investment portfolio on the wall in a public class.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It literally, it's designed as a 4-day boot camp. Got converted into 2 days plus 2 follow-up days spread over the following quarter. But it's meant to be get to the end of it, walk out of the room and go, we've built a picture of our portfolio. We know where we are and we've got a good, effective visualization of where we are. We've identified some key opportunities for change. And we've got an action plan we're going to start following to implement those opportunities for change and begin the path to evolution. So it's a lot of fun.
You.
You've gone very quiet, Saahil.
Only because I'm trying not to start a whole new conversation right now. I have a lot of feelings about what you just presented and the conversation, and I think that I'm just trying to store them up for next Saturday.
Right. Well, there you go. That's next Saturday. So it feels like I've been sitting on it until we had the energy for it, because I suspect it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to having this conversation next Saturday.
So that feels like a good time to call it.
Yep.
2 a.m.
Agreed.
That's our usual bat time. I'm just going to switch us over to our outro scene so we can get to a graceful close. I haven't heard from Eric or Yuval for a while, so I'm assuming they've got busy with life.
But just in case, thanks for joining us.
Very true. Give me a ping on Discord. Very happy to give you a OBS run through. I will tell you, after some initial teething problems tonight, the new set of scenes I've got was way, way easier to play with.
Awesome.
So
I loved some of the just transitions you did today. The comment pop-up was really cool. The fact that you labeled all of the video windows so with people's names is really cool. There's a lot of iterating that Mark has done that is really cool. So I'm excited to hear about it behind the scenes.
all right. Have a good weekend, gents. We are on the outro and we are cooked.
Great.
Ciao.
Great.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night, Mark.
Good night.
Enjoy your Saturday, Wolfgang. Bye, guys.
Bye.